In 1565, Spain begins its colonization of the New World upon the wild and untamed shores of La Florida. 800 men and women would begin their new lives in this unknown and deadly land.
Glory to God! We have found La Florida!
Is that your accent?
Glory to God!
Because you sound kind of Italian.
Not Italian? I'm Spanish. I'm a Spanish conquistador in the shores of the New World.
You sound kind of like a Super Mario brother.
I don't have a good Spanish accent.
Why don't you try an English accent?
I'm the English conquistador.
Oh, yes. Everybody in those historical reenactment documentaries has English accents.
Oh, okay.
Cut. Greg, the boom's in the shot.
Sorry.
Yeah, ladies. I don't care if you have Moroccan accents. Let's just get to it.
When did the Moroccans sail to Florida?
They didn't. Just do it. Oh. I knew I should have taken that PA job on The Simple Life. Action.
Picture it. Florida, 1565.
A Spanish admiral named Pedro Menendez de Aviles has come to these shores to fight the French at Fort Caroline. To stop the road, that away.
That away.
That away.
He establishes among the Timucua Indians a settlement and names it St. Augustine. More than 400 years later, the city still stands as the oldest European town in America. Hi, I'm Marty.
And I'm Kim.
And we're geeks.
Total geeks, but cute ones.
Well, that goes without saying.
We're here on a street in St. Augustine, Florida, the oldest European settlement in America. 400 years ago, ordinary men, women, and geeks like us were here living life and conquering this wild country.
Well, if we were here 400 years ago, we'd have about 10 pounds of skirts on right now.
And no deodorants.
Ew, nice.
When Marty and I visit a place, we don't just think, boy, this place sure is pretty.
We think, what was life really like? So, we live the past. Today, this oldest of American cities is a beautiful tourist destination. But way back when... St. Augustine was founded 42 years before Jamestown. The land was wild and the weather was steaming.
After massacring the French at Fort Caroline, Admiral Menendez de Aviles met Chief Saloy of the Timucua Indians at what would become St. Augustine.
The Spanish settled in Chief Saloy's town, and its council house became their first fort. They settled here with 800 people, including slaves from Africa and only 26 women.
I bet those girls were popular. Popular!
Indeed. That's one woman to every 30 men.
Wow. St. Augustine became a Spanish crown colony in 1576, but that didn't really help the colonists that much.
Spain was occupied with winning wars, hunting pirates, and persecuting non-Catholics, so it didn't really spend a lot of time worrying about or helping their little colony in Florida.
St. Augustine was largely on its own. Imagine being here a few centuries ago.
I can imagine that. Oh. Hey! Now, first of all, it's a wonder you have even survived the journey from the old world. Well, with all the sea monsters and pirates and
there's nothing between you and the deadly elements.
Sunburn, mosquitoes. Ow! And the 30 men who all want to get into your chastity belt.
There's nothing here but a few houses in a town square. No food, unless you catch it or grow it.
And no goods, such as cloth or furniture, unless you make it. I mean, there's nothing here except you and the other settlers.
The people who came here were either incredibly brave or incredibly naive.
Maybe a little both.
Or maybe life in Spain was so bad that this seemed like a good alternative.
The English settled Charleston to the north in 1670. Now, because of the English threat, ongoing tensions with France, and the pirate Robert Seal's penchant for sacking the town, Spain finally took notice of its little settlement and began construction of a real stone fort.
The Castillo de San Marcos, completed in 1695, has guarded St. Augustine ever since.
Even though it has switched hands from the Spanish
to the English
and back to the Spanish, the fort has never been taken by force.
Now we'd like to introduce to you Mr. John Stavely, National Director of Historic Entertainment for Historic Tours of America.
Hi!
Group hug!
Shall we?
Yes. Please tell us about coquina and its practicality for fortress construction.
The fort is constructed out of coquina, which is a native shell stone that many people are not familiar with because it isn't found in many places in the world. When the Spanish got here, they didn't find native stone of any kind. There was no granite, there was nothing to build with. And eventually they discovered this stone shell that was down in the ground. Now, clam shells over millions of years have been pressed down to make this shell, and they were able to take it out and form it and fashion it into the fort that we see today. And the interesting property is that coquina isn't like regular stone that shatters when it's hit with a cannonball. In fact, the cannonball almost sinks in a little bit and then falls down to the ground. So it was a great material for building the fort out of.
How did the English manage to claim St. Augustine for their own in 1763?
By treaty. The Treaty of Paris, not a single shot was fired. They agreed to trade some land with each other. So the Spanish got Cuba, and many of them went from Florida to Cuba. They went to Mexico, they went back to Spain, and the English took over Florida. In fact, during the Revolutionary War, many people in Florida were still loyal to England and King George.
St. Augustine has endured its share of piratical attacks. Could you please tell us the story of pirate Andrew Ransom?
Many pirates came to St. Augustine, as you might imagine. All the Spanish gold, all the treasure would come through here. And so the pirates would follow this trail. But one pirate in particular is very memorable. His name was Andrew Ransom. Now, Andrew was an English pirate. He was captured just north of the city in 1684. Well, they were going to make an example of him. They were going to have a public execution, which was not common in St. Augustine at the time. Well, on the appointed day, they brought him down to our town plaza, and all the town had gathered. And they were going to do something called a garrote. So they took this wooden post, drilled a hole through it, they put a rope through it around his neck, back out the hole, tied it off in the back, and slipped a stick in the loop behind. Now, when you turn this stick and back, it made the loop in front smaller and smaller and smaller. Well, this was the plan. So they had Andrew there. They put him up against the post, put that heavy, coarse rope around his neck. Well, they began to turn, and Andrew knew the end was near. On the fourth turn, the sky above him began to swirl as he lost his breath. But then suddenly, the rope broke. It snapped and he fell to his knees. Well, the priest who was in attendance grabbed him, ran into the church, and protected him at sanctuary. Well, Andrew made friends with everybody and spent about 3 years in that church. He was a very clever pirate. Well, finally they enlisted his help in building the Castillo de San Marcos, our fort. And eventually he became so useful that they gave him his freedom. So the pirate that came to rob them eventually ended up becoming their ally.
Now we're going to explore one of the most important aspect of any historic town, the bars. This is the Taberna del Gallo.
Roughly translated as Tavern of the Cock.
Rooster.
Oh, Tavern of the Rooster. Now inside the Taberna del Gallo, there is no modern lighting, but there are lots of kooks who like to dress up in costume for fun, like us.
And they have beer, costumes, and booze. A winning combination.
St. Augustine and the rest of Florida was transferred to the United States in 1821.
And in 1824, Florida became the 27th state.
At the start of the Civil War, St. Augustine was occupied by Union troops.
So even though Florida was a Confederate state, the fort was under Union control.
Ha! Once the war was over, land developers and new visitors came to Florida and St. Augustine began to grow. No longer was St. Augustine a backwards little Florida town. Soon it became positively gentrified.
Thus began the Flagler era, starting in 1885.
So named for Henry Flagler, oil tycoon, who determined that St. Augustine would make a fabulous winter playground for wealthy northerners. I could not agree more.
This is the Ponce de Leon Hotel, one of 2 hotels Henry Flagler built to accommodate his millionaire friends, and the most luxurious in its day. Now it is the home of Flagler College.
And now we're going to welcome back our friend John Stavely, expert on Mr. Flagler. Hi, John.
Hi,
nice
how are
to
you?
see you again.
So good to see you.
John.
Shall we go inside?
Oh, let's do.
Please give us a bit of biography on Henry Flagler, the man who created this magnificent structure.
Henry Flagler, the man who built this wonderful Ponce de Leon hotel, was a real American success story. Left home when he was 14, went out to seek his fortune, until eventually he met John D. Rockefeller. So in 1870 they formed Standard Oil, and that's when his fortune was made. He became worth hundreds of millions of dollars, came to St. Augustine and started building buildings, extending the railroad, and all the wealthy people from up north came here to vacation.
Please tell us how the women in his life influenced his architectural pursuits.
First, of course, he came to St. Augustine because of his wife's health, his first wife, Mary Harkness. So when he came here, he didn't find accommodations to his liking, so he needed to build a hotel in order for them to stay in. And this really sort of launched the whole thing. Of course, when she passed away, he married her nurse, Ida Alice, who was the life of the party. And she needed some social activities. And so when he built his structures, his hotels, the things in St. Augustine, he had that in mind for Ida Alice because she wanted to entertain. So a lot of his architecture was influenced by that. He put in electricity for the first time in Florida, and magnificent, nothing was spared, no expense, everything handcrafted, because he really wanted to make sure that she was very happy.
Now I'd like to include a quote from your book, Ghosts and Gravestones in St. Augustine, Florida. The lives that were lived over the centuries have accumulated their energy and left an enduring afterglow in this place. Just walk down the streets and you will understand.
St. Augustine is filled with ghost stories. There are hundreds of them, literally. One of my favorites involves a real man, a man named John B. Stickney, who came here after the Civil War. Now, when he stepped off the train, a murmur went through the crowd. "It's a Yankee! It's a Northerner!" But he turned out to be a pretty good guy. He settled here, became a lawyer, eventually became a judge, and in 1882 he went up to D.C. He became very ill. He passed away. But his final requests were to be buried in St. Augustine and also to have his daughters taken care of by his good friend, Judge Long. And as his daughters grew up, they were sitting on the porch one day and they said, "Wouldn't it be lovely? Wouldn't it be nice to have our daddy brought up to Washington to be buried here near us?" Well, can you imagine? It was 1903 and they sent for a man named Gravedigger Wells. Now, Gravedigger Wells in St. Augustine had to dig up this coffin and have it sent up to the north. He wasn't too keen on it, but he set to work. It took him almost an hour and a half before he chunked into the lid of that coffin. Well, by then a little crowd had gathered. And amongst that crowd were two fellows they called scallywags. They were no good. They were not watching their P's and Q's that morning, their pints and quarts. They were drunk. Well, they started fiddling around when Gravedigger Wells wasn't looking. They started looking for anything valuable in John B. Stickney's coffin. They found gold teeth. They pulled out the gold teeth as fast as they could and off they went. Well, they never did catch them. They never got the teeth back. But the body was sent up north as his daughters requested. And then a few months later, it began to show up. The apparition. He'd walk around that area where John B. Stickney had been buried before. Well, people knew. They knew it was the essence, the ghost, what was left of John B. Stickney. But no one knew why he was there. What could it be? Well, there are lots of theories. Some people say, well, he's looking for his teeth. He's trying to find those gold teeth and get them back. Others say, no, he was a judge in life. He's looking for the men to punish them. And still others said, no, John B. Stickney is looking for a good dentist.
Back in the day, the elite who played here also took an interest in the history of St. Augustine, which brings us to our women's moment.
And now,
Marty
and Kim present the Women's Moment.
A moment in which women changed history.
I say, Cornelia, this is a wonderful idea to save the city gates from destruction.
Indeed, Cordelia, we shall persevere against the heartless brutes who would tear down this beautiful monument to St. Augustine's past.
Very stirring. I'm almost moved.
We shall chain ourselves to the gates, and if they perish, so shall we.
But of course they won't actually destroy the gates if we are chained to them.
Of course not, Cordelia.
Oh, good. Smashing idea. I say, Cornelia, this is too difficult.
Indeed, Cordelia.
Perhaps if we simply stand in front of the gates, the gesture will be just as effective.
We can even sit. I'm quite good at sitting.
Smashing.
Smashing.
And so the ladies of the day sat and served tea in front of the St. Augustine city gates, much to the chagrin of the workers who had been sent to destroy them. Thus, they saved one of the city's most historic landmarks.
I'm here for the chain party.
Who invited Gertrude?
She is my cousin.
One of the most interesting things that few people know about St. Augustine is that Nazi U-boats were sighted off the coast in 1942.
The Nazis called it Operation Drumbeat.
They would sink nearly 400 Allied trade ships, and the explosions could be seen from St. Augustine.
The Germans brought the war to us, and we never even knew it. Great and terrible and amazing things have shaped the city of St. Augustine throughout the centuries.
But we're going to take a break from those for a moment.
It is now time for obscure moments in history.
In the 1930s, the St. Augustine Lighthouse was home to keeper's son C.D. Cracker Daniels and family cat Smokey.
Yes, a boy and his cat. You can see where this is going, can't you?
One fine day, Cracker, that's the boy, and Smokey, that's the cat, took a friendly, leisurely stroll up the 219 steps of the circular staircase to the very top of the lighthouse.
Oh dear.
Cracker, who had an interest in aerodynamics,
Was about to conduct his own experiment in said scientific subject.
after carefully fashioning a miniature parachute and extra carefully attaching it to Smokey,
He tossed the cat from the top of the tower.
Meow.
the whole kit and caboodle. Get it? Kitten caboodle?
Do not fear, gentle viewers. Cracker had done a fine job on the parachute, and Smokey the cat landed safely.
Although in a rather grumpy mood.
And now we are proud to welcome to the Obscure Moments in History Studios, Smokey the cat!
Smokey, is it true that you've always shared your owner's interest in aerodynamics?
He has always shared my interest in it. I have a master's in aerospace engineering from Cornell. Cracker couldn't engineer a ham sandwich.
Do you mean to say that you designed the parachute?
Of course. I wouldn't be alive today if I hadn't. The genius of the feline species has always been belittled by you pathetic, sniveling humans.
Well, that's about all the time we have for now.
No, I will not be silent.
Cut! Cut!
Well, Marty, did we live the past? Have we learned what life has been like in the nation's oldest city?
Well, we've learned that we shouldn't interview cats.
Yes, I feel like that should have been obvious.
Oh well, cat win 'em all. Oh, come on. It wasn't any worse than Kitten Caboodle.
Fair enough. We will now share with you the story of St. Augustine, abridged in song. And in keeping with our historical theme, the tune is that of an 18th century tavern song.
Like those ones sung in our very own Tavern of the Rooster. The true honest Indians first lived on this land. Then Spain came along and they took everything. Then England said hi, so Spain said bye-bye. But 20 years later, Spain came back to sing. Spain rules Florida, it sucks to be you. It sucks to be English in St. Augustine. There were wars and mosquitoes, the plague and the French. Poor hygiene's no secret, imagine the stench. But now we've joined forces, we're US of A. Come and see this first city down Florida way.